right, so this is building tech, technology serving the built environment. So we're going to talk about culture, we're going to talk about new tenant expectations, we're going to talk about just generally how we are as humans, as individuals, as groups, connecting with our spaces, connecting with each other through our spaces. So can I just have everyone give a brief introduction about themselves?
Thank you. Hi, I'm Amanda Carroll. I'm a principal at Gensler. We're a global architecture and design firm. We have about 46 offices worldwide and about 6,000 employees. And I'm based in the New York office where I lead a studio. And that studio is focused on workplace interiors, predominantly building out spaces for tech companies like Google or IBM, or media companies like Vox or Hulu, and occasionally a consumer products company. And it was very interesting to hear some of the dialogue earlier because they're all in spaces that are somehow leased by Silverstein or Brookfield.
Hi, John Gilbert, Chief Operating Officer, Executive Vice President at Rudin, and also Executive Chairman of Prescriptive Data, a company that was mentioned in the prior panel. We've actually created Project Moneyball for those of you who have heard of Nantum, which is a single integrated platform that brings all the data that a building collects into a single platform so that those data sets can be correlated with each other and against each other, ultimately to create efficiencies and a better building, better tenant experience as well.
Hi, I'm Wendy Heller. I am the Senior Workplace Strategist on the Global Workplace team at the Coca-Cola Company. I'm responsible for our workplace strategy, developing our global workplace guidelines, thinking about our user experience and how we develop workplace and how that responds with what our business needs.
I am Will Coleman. I'm CEO of Lucid. We have a SaaS platform, a cloud-based data analytics platform called Building OS. It's also Project Moneyball. So Kent, don't go build your own. Come talk to one of us or both of us. But we integrate data streams from all over building portfolios. So we really think about it as a portfolio solution. Everything from systems and sensors through to utility data, through to ERP data, work order data, all of that. And the point is that people need to integrate those rich streams of data in order to actually derive the kinds of insights that give them real value. So that's what we do.
Yeah, and as you can see, we have a variety of different perspectives on this panel. So everybody is going to come from a completely different angle, different kind of use case for how they're using technology. But my first question is, you know, in what aspect of the built environment is technology making the greatest impact right now? And again, I know you'll all have very different answers, but Amanda, why don't you kick us off?
Okay, I think with regard from, I'll speak from the tenant standpoint, so with how our clients would talk to it. I think right now, technology for them more immediately is just all about how they can connect people around the world and especially around their own campus. So we've been talking a lot about across the firm, we design for LinkedIn, Amazon, Google, Facebook, you name it, every top 20 tech company we work with. And they're really struggling with scale. They're trying to understand how they navigate an urban environment and build out a campus that actually is still secure but connected and not sacrificing experience. And technology is really essential to every part of that equation because it's also happening in a way that's planning at scale that is committing to a 50-year plan. And you know, I don't know any single person in this room that hasn't thought about where Amazon's headquarters is going to go. And the beauty of that is that every other tech company is benefiting from the vetting process that Amazon did. And has a really easy short list of cities to consider for themselves. So I think right now what we're seeing is that technology is really enabling, is very much at the forefront of their conversation around how they're going to manage their portfolio.
We look at it very simply, which is if you think you're in the real estate business, think again, because you're really in the technology business. And every piece of data that you collect needs to be remembered and learned and patterns identified. I'm looking at Nantum right now, and I can tell you on the aggregate in the Rudin portfolio, I've got 18,741 people. We're burning 21.8 megawatts of power, 54 M-pounds of steam, and already consumed today 285,706 gallons of water. So this situational awareness is in real time. This is not a look back on a monthly basis or daily basis. It's literally real time. When you're in a Nantum-enabled building, your occupancy matters because it ultimately influences fan speed. So as people go out to lunch, our occupancy sensors see that data, tell the gateway to tell the BMS to slow the fans down, and we save an enormous amount of electricity in the middle of the day because we're not pushing as much volumetric air. Now on the tenant experience side of that, how many people here have come back from lunch, sat down at their desk and said, oh my God, it's freezing in here? There's a reason for that. Because as you left for lunch in a typical building, the amount of volumetric air was not varied. It was exactly the same level of CFM and chilled air as when the building was fully occupied. So of course temperatures are going to drop. So this system is saving the Rudin portfolio, 10 million square feet, $5.5 million a year. Simply by understanding the data that you're already collecting, correlating data sets that never talk to each other. What other buildings now used occupancy to correlate fan speed and chilled water temperatures? Only Nantum that we found. So the ability, to answer the question is that technology is touching us across our entire spectrum. We're mostly focused on the operational side because that's where the savings can be, but the end result is a better experience for the tenant. The third piece you get is that you get to future-proof your building so that all of us as property owners and technology companies who are calling us, please put in our technology into your building. Well, if I do that with a quarter of the people that call me, I'm going to multiply the number of silos and dashboards that I have exponentially, actually linearly. But if I have a single dashboard, a single cockpit, a single operational platform, then I can simply plug in those technologies immediately with our dynamic graphs, understand the relationship that new data brings to all other data sets that I'm already collecting. Hugely valuable. And you immediately, with 1 day worth of data, understand whether or not that new technology is helpful or not. So you future-proof your buildings, which obviously is hugely important.
Absolutely. Wendy, where is technology making the most impact in your world right now?
So as we think about technology, I think we look at it a little bit differently. We're looking a little bit about how we connect in the business, right? So we're a global business. We operate in 207 countries. And we're really thinking a little bit more about how people connect with people, how we make those connections more real. And so, yes, we are looking at all of that information. We're looking at all of our building utilization. Those are all things that are that we're doing and are also in our future, but we're also looking at how do we make our relationships more vital, because we're a company that's all about making connections in the world. And so we're looking at how do we use collaboration tools? How do we make that richer? And so we are using all of that to create one platform around the world so that whether you are in Zimbabwe, Johannesburg, New York, Atlanta, you walk into an office, and I noticed the dongle slide earlier today totally resonated. We agree, you shouldn't have to walk into an office and spend 20 minutes connecting. It should be as easy as your home Apple connection. It should just work. And we also want for that to be as seamless and authentic as FaceTime on your iPhone. It also should be as secure as what you would expect in your corporate setting. So those are some of the things that are really important to us, not to minimize at all of the savings that come out of the tools that you're talking about. I just think from a company that values the human experience, that's something that, we want to focus on.
Yeah, going last, I get to combine what everybody said, but
You're so lucky.
or not. No, but I think what's interesting is when you look at technology in the commercial real estate space is it really does move in waves like a lot of industries. And I think that first wave was really around leasing technology, View the Space, Hightower, all those guys. That wave is kind of past. We know who the winners are in that space. And the next one really is about experience. I think we've seen a ton of these different applications trying to provide better experiences for tenants, and particularly here in New York where it's really multi-tenant driven. We exist in both the multi-tenant and the owner-occupier space. And what we're seeing is that it's increasingly about how you integrate all these different systems so that you can provide that single interface into a building so that people can have a single source of truth. They can collaborate across the same data sets. They can derive the same kinds of insights and share those. But it's one of those things where I thought Brian's presentation was really interesting earlier because he was showing that New York has already achieved some pretty significant energy efficiency savings. But that's been done with a lot of point solutions where you have somebody who's down in the basement controlling their BMS system, and you've got somebody who's looking at their lighting system. Those things aren't integrated, and we've seen a lot of savings just from turning the dials on those things. The reality is a lot of the big savings are from how you integrate this data. And once you integrate that data, you see these things sort of pop out at you about what's happening inside these buildings and across these portfolios that you wouldn't otherwise see. So to me, that's where, as you get more and more of these data streams correlated, it's those insights that seemed hard to find become very obvious. Yeah. And it moves the needle significantly.
Amanda, we talked a lot about how the digital world is being blended into the built environment, into our physical spaces. Can you give an example of how you've seen that blend happen, and really what are the implications either for the occupiers or for the landlords? And I'm sure two totally different perspectives.
Sure. So, I think we have a range. I'll touch on it just to give you guys some context, because I'm coming from the different standpoint, which is the service provider standpoint as opposed to the landlord or to the end user. But, we work with companies that are as young as 5 years old, and we work with companies that are as old as 200 years old. So I'll give an example of a 200-year-old company like United Technologies. They're a Fortune 50 company worth $60 billion. And they, for the first time, are implementing a digital accelerator in Brooklyn, which we just opened last week. And for them, their entire business is technologies. They own Otis elevators, which I'm sure we've all ridden in, and they move the world's population every 28 days between Otis, Pratt & Whitney, Climate Control Systems, which is Carrier, which might be cooling the space, and UTAS, which is an aerospace organization. And what we saw with them, which was really interesting, is that they are now treating their space the same way they treat any other product that they engineer. And engineering excellence is expected within their organization. It's what the organization's built on. And I think there's a lot of companies, when you talk about this transformation from being let's say a consumer products company or anyone who manufactures anything physical, is underlaying this digital component. And for them, in this accelerator, it's really unearthing what systems we all take for granted every day, but are actually the beating pulse of their space. So there's the sexiest mechanical room you've ever seen, which identifies every single one of the different systems that's controlling and operating the space that you can see in real-time diagnostics of. But the thing that's really interesting about that is that it's actually intentionally done in an analog way. And we're seeing that most of our tech clients actually want to get the data but not see it. The dashboard in the space feels like actually this morning someone said to me, I don't want to see a dashboard like that because it feels like my brain. And that's what my brain looks like and is every day, and I want something else. So humanizing, I think, is a really core part of this new dichotomy between a lot of information, a lot of ways to display it, maybe not a lot of valuable insights, but just a lot of content, and then finding ways to tell a more meaningful story. And I think United Technologies, what they're doing is more meaningful because it's more tactical. And it's also it's very one of a kind. And more and more, I think you're going to see that destinations and office spaces will have really unique, different approaches to how they take their data, they humanize it, they make it local, they make it personal, and they make it interactive.
Yeah.
And I'd like to build on that, because I think, we're doing, on our team and across the business, we're getting asked a lot about our data. We're getting asked a lot about, where does that data come from? What about this? What about that? And the first thing that, I'm not a data person by background, but the first thing I say is, but what's the question, right? What do you need? What are you interested in? Before we get into, where's the dashboard? What do we need to build? How do you want to see that? What are you wondering? Let's start there.
Or what are you trying to solve for?
What are you trying to solve for? And then we have so much data. And we'll build your unique identifiers. We'll get all of our systems talking to each other. We can get as many insights as you want. But first, let's get to the questions so we can solve for what you're really interested in. Qualitative, quantitative, measure everything. But if we don't start with the question, we'll come up with wrong answers.
It's interesting, Pablo Picasso, right before he died, was quoted as saying that computers were overrated because they only gave you answers and they didn't tell you what questions to ask. So I think that's interesting. We like to say that buildings have always had a heart, engine room, boiler room. Now they have a brain, Nantum. And I think the control room that you were talking about is no longer in a hidden someplace. It's actually mobile, and it can be that data can be accessed anywhere you are because it is mobile and is coming from the cloud. So you have a heart, you have a brain. What's the final frontier? Final frontier is the central nervous system. And Sandy and Ryan and I spent a couple weeks ago in the south of France at the MIPIM show. And we're partnering with a very interesting company. What I'm holding in my hand, I feel like Sam Irwin from the Watergate. But this is actually a sensor. This has a 15-year battery. It has a radio. And it has a sensor. This particular sensor is a temperature sensor. And it costs $1 a month and can connect to Nantum. And ultimately, that data can be expressed immediately. So regardless whether you have a BMS or don't have a BMS, Nantum is actually in New York City homeless shelters right now, and what we're testing for is tuberculosis spores. So it doesn't matter whether it's coming from a BMS. It can be any sensor. And ultimately, bringing back that data, it needs a brain to make sense of that data. Because everybody says, oh, it's all about the data. It's really not. It's about what you do with the data. It's about whether it's actionable or not. It's about whether it's useful or not. It's about whether or not you share it with your customers to create new stickiness and a new relationship with your tenants, which we do. So one thing you should do if you walk out of here, you should be saying to yourself, it's not just about the data. It's about how we as human beings use that data to make it useful. That's the key piece.
Absolutely. Will?
I'll try and connect the dots again. I couldn't agree more that it's really about the experience on the front end, right? It's really about making this data and the analytics and the insights something that people can actually consume. That was where we got our start, was trying to make it consumable to kids as little as 5 years old all the way up. And then we really realized that there was a huge power to how you handled and provided this data to people. But I think, and it's interesting, we are actually partners with UTC as well, and we provide the interfaces to their ALC systems, and then we're deploying with Carrier later this year. So, they're trying to figure out how to make it human, right? They've got a lot of systems out there in the world, and they're trying to figure that out. The other piece of it is that we were actually recently acquired by Acuity Brands, which is the leader in LED lighting in North America, and they do connected lighting, digital lighting networks. They really are thinking intensely about how do you create this network of sensors, which will be a combination of, using lighting, which is ubiquitous as a last mile carrier of that data, along with open platforms that combine all the different sensors you can imagine being proliferated across these spaces. But ultimately, it comes down to what end. And so what happens with us a lot is people come to us and they say, well, what do you deploy? What's the infrastructure you deploy? How long does it take you to do that? What does that look like? And the reality is we turn that around on them and we say, what are you trying to accomplish, right? So you have to know to some degree what it is that you're trying to accomplish so we know what value you're trying to extract. And we can help guide through that process of what's worth deploying and what's not. But it's going to be a journey for every customer. Not every customer is ready to go and deploy the most sophisticated control system in the world. It'll be a total waste of money, and it'll be too expensive, and they won't see the ROI, right? You have to figure out where that customer is in terms of their journey with their portfolio, and it may be different across their buildings. They may have some buildings that are highly sophisticated and are ready for deep analytics and machine learning, and they may have some where all they want to do is centralize their utility bills and understand whether or not they're being paid or whether or not they're out of whack in this building or that building. Maybe very simple things that they want to solve for first. And the challenge in commercial real estate in particular is you're talking about portfolios that are pretty diverse, right? So they're often acquired at different times. They have infrastructure that's been put in over decades. And anybody who owns a big portfolio is trying to figure out, how do I get some common set of data and insights out of this set of snowflakes? And that's the big challenge. So that's, for us, it was all about building an open platform to deal with that so that we could really prescribe what is the best solution for you based on that portfolio.
I was just going to say, I think, what John was describing is fantastic. If it could happen everywhere, that would be fantastic, right? Because we, as an industry, between construction operations and management of buildings, contribute to 1/3 of the carbon dioxide in the world. Like, we have a terrible carbon footprint. But if you looked beyond just the efficiency of systems and you start creating an expectation of a better experience, where I feel that there will be some real sort of game-changing turn for us as an industry is going to be around the real-time responsiveness. So like if it goes beyond just systems and it becomes that the user's expectation is that the information that's coming back to whomever's hosting that experience should be reacted on in real time, that's going to mean completely different service industry model or a completely different approach to the way that you think about expectations in space if they're not able to be adjusted by your central nervous system. If it's something that's actually, I know I was seeing outside, someone had a way for you to report that a table's broken or a way for you to report, that kind of service, then how does that get fixed? And I think, the basics around technology are still not really being solved at an elementary level around connecting people. I mean, how many times is somebody, embarrassed when you walk in a meeting room you've never been in before and it takes you 10 minutes to set up because you still can't figure out, even though you have all Apple products, how you're going to get onto that Hangout. Like, it's just, there are a lot of barriers. And then when you add in some of these more advanced progressions, I feel that there's going to be probably a pretty stark misalignment between the spectrum of experiences that could be hosted. And we'll see.
And in the last panel, we talked in large part about technology just aiding us in removing the friction.
Yeah.
Right? Rather than trying to make it, this amazing futuristic experience, that's not the goal. The goal is to reduce the friction. And I think, the notion of IoT and connecting systems really helps us at least get there one step in the right direction. So my next question is for Will. Why is it important that building systems connect, talk to, and also learn from each other? And what can we expect as a result in the future?
Yeah, I think it goes back to all these silos, right? Where if you look at the first phase of energy efficiency, so much of it was done with these individual levers. And, you might have gone and deployed an energy efficiency mechanism, and that would have been reduce your air conditioning, right? It would have been reduce the number of turns in your outdoor air handling units. But that might have a negative effect in terms of the health of people inside the building. And so, your air quality might go down, people might get less productive. There's all sorts of implications to these things. And so you have to figure out what the relationship is between the things you care about. And if it's productivity and health, that's one metric. If it's energy efficiency, that's another. And the question is, how do you optimize between all of these different things? Yeah. And so once you integrate those things, then you can get that point of view.
Yeah, interesting. John, what do you think?
Well, I think Amanda said something really interesting in terms of the experience in real time. Nantum has cut our hot and cold calls by 80%, simply because our operators are able to see discomfort, that curve approaching discomfort, fix it before the individual actually feels discomfort. And what we've also done is created a Tenant App. There's really three pieces, right? There's the core, which is Nantum operating system. There's then the enterprise, which is Nantum Tenant Fractal. And then there's the individual employee, which we've created an app. If you can get on an airplane, you sure as heck should be able to get into a building with a QR code, right? So you get into the building, you're able to manage your guests, you're able to manage your own space in terms of conference rooms, and you're also able to say, too hot, too cold, and there's something that needs to be fixed, take a picture and send it immediately to the facilities folks. So it has to touch each of those legs of that three-legged stool in order to truly be an operating system. And again, Nantum was built by people who run buildings for people who run buildings. So there isn't a miss here in terms of what's important and a system that's designed for actually doing what we do every day, all day.
I want to jump back to something we talked about in our pre-panel call, and it's really this notion of wanting to capture all of the opportunities that technology can provide us and has to offer, but also be secure in doing so, and really as real estate professionals redefining what that security means for occupiers. Can we touch on that?
You want to kick it off as the occupier?
Let's go ahead.
Wendy?
Yeah, sure. So I think, we live in a world where security is crucial, right? Like, to minimize that would be foolhardy, right? That is, when we ask our people, what's the number one thing that you like about working in our spaces, the majority say they feel safe. And so I think that's key, and that's physical safety and virtual safety. And so thinking about how, as we think about IoT, where does all of that live? Does it live on our networks? Does it live in a separate network? Does it live elsewhere? Those are things that are part of the developing conversation. And so, we started talking about how we are solving for that. And I don't think, for us, it's not solved yet. And so we're in the process of working through all of that, truly.
Yeah.
This is just to give you guys a sense, but we work with IBM very closely around the world, and we developed for their headquarters a visualization of one of three different verticals that they explore, because they have very extreme capabilities with Watson. And it was just visualizing cybersecurity attacks around the world. And so it takes the globe and it gives it a different color spike in length based on quantity. And there's billions of cybersecurity attacks that are happening in every country, and with different frequency and different types. And I think it's not at the forefront of our conversation, right? I think systems and security around the technology inside a building is not really at the forefront of the dialogue yet, and it's very much a part of the experience, because one of the things that we talk about a lot now is that luxury is actually seamless. Like, it doesn't, the quality of a space and the character or the aesthetic of a space, of course it matters, but if it prevents a lot of roadblocks for you, you're not going to see it as a luxury experience. You just won't. The things that you value the most now that really sort of elevate are the journeys you have when you walk in, and there's not 4 different people you have to interface with and say your name and show your ID to, and that kind of thing that we just really have not solved. We have not figured it out, and I don't know that also we understand how to do it at scale. I think that airports can and have proven how to do that. But inside the commercial office building realm, there's just a lot less in place. And we foresee that it will be increasingly an issue as we have more contract workers who are coming in and out of very densely populated urban environments every day with potentially not as long as of a trail of sort of history as an employee or maybe first time, and those are going to be a new wave of concerns as we move to having half of our workforce really being a contract worker.
Yeah, I think we take, I think security is critical, right? You look at these systems, you look at some of the things like what happened with Sony a couple of years ago, right? I mean, the penetration into people's networks is a pretty key concern. I think what's interesting for us is often one of the biggest barriers is IT, right? Those guys we're not typically being bought by IT. We're being bought by facility managers, operations, CFOs, CIOs.
And then having to figure out the integration.
And figure out the integration. And what's interesting about it though is, the level of security that we provide is pretty significant compared to what gets onto their network on a daily basis through all these different phones and everything else. And so, I thought it was fascinating. A few years ago, we went and talked to one of the big companies who provides your own personal data in the cloud. And when we talked to them, the first thing they said was, oh, it's in the cloud. Yeah, we're not putting our data in the cloud. So, we're sitting there with all our personal data in the cloud, their cloud, and they're not comfortable putting all of their data in our cloud. And it was interesting because that was a few years ago. They're now a customer. Their customer in the cloud, they kind of came around to it and they realized what the dynamic was. But it takes, even for those guys who know exactly what cloud means, some time to get comfortable with it and understand. So, I think part of it is we need to converge IT and OT. We need to figure out how those groups can talk to each other in a way where they understand what the risks really are. And we need to do a very good job of explaining how we treat security and how we take care of security in our own house.
Yeah.
We look at it just the opposite, in that we're not going to ride on any tenant's network. There has to be a parallel network that ultimately is the building network, and that is totally separate from the enterprise. If people aren't learning and understanding what's going on by studying what's with the Facebook fiasco right now, then shame on you. Let's understand one thing. If you own buildings, you better make sure that you own your data, and that whatever entity is coming in to help you manage that data is not selling it out the back door. The reality of what, regardless of what Zuckerberg said in 2009, and the reality of what's happening today and has been happening over the last 7 or 8 years, everybody's data, every time you click that mouse, you are being mapped. Everywhere you go on the web, you are leaving nice little trails of cookie crumbs that people can follow and see where you've gone. That's the reality. On the building side, as an owner of real estate, we own the liability for keeping people safe within our buildings. We own it. We are never, ever going to give that away to a third party. Never. So, and we look at our data the same way. So if you're looking at an integrated system, which you should if you want to future-proof your buildings, make sure that your data is your data. And that from a contractual standpoint, nobody has their fingers on their data, that data, except you. And make sure, most important piece, that you can use that data to learn from it with machine learning, to remember it with AI, and ultimately to use it to your advantage to run your buildings more efficiently. That's what the data's for, and that's what you should use it for.
So on that note, I'm going to say thank you so much to this panel.